Hello ladies, Emmys and gents. A bit of an apology first. I know it's been a bit quiet on the Drink Tank of late. We've all been a bit busy or ill, or otherwise we've been a bit preoccupied with other things. But we're back to making videos this week, hopefully. And we decided to discuss trigger warnings, and specifically I want to discuss some of the arguments used against them. There's two particular ones that keep coming up that I find quite irritating and quite puerile, and they would be the Nirvana fallacy and something called reductio ad absurdum, which is not always a fallacy, but it is if it's used as a straw man, as it usually is in this kind of argument. Now, the Nirvana fallacy, for anyone who doesn't know, is when you argue that because you can't make the world a perfect place, you shouldn't bother trying to improve it at all. And my argument would be we should at least try our best to try and improve the world, even if we can't make it into an absolute utopia. We should still try. And this argument, when it comes to trigger warnings, is usually runs along the lines of, well, you can't account for everything that might trigger someone. You know, there's all sorts of obscure things that can trigger a person. You know, someone might be triggered by really mundane discussions of really mundane things. And I would say, well, it's entirely possible people might be triggered by things like that. But just because we can't account for everything a person might be triggered by doesn't mean we can't account for anything. You know, we can look at what are the most common things that trigger people, what are the things that have had the biggest complaints made about them, and try and be careful about giving trigger warnings for those sorts of things. But this sort of ties in with reductio ad absurdum. Is usually people will just blurt out the notion that because, oh, you know, people can be triggered by anything, therefore we shouldn't discuss anything. Now, first of all, I mean, it's a straw man for two reasons. One, that a trigger warning isn't saying we shouldn't discuss something. It's actually saying the opposite. We should discuss it. We just need to give people a bit of a heads up that that's what we're discussing. Allow them to prepare themselves for the content to become. If they're feeling they really aren't up to having that discussion, they can excuse themselves from it. That's really all the trigger warning is. It's actually perfectly simple. It's nothing like as complicated as its opponents like to imply that it is. So we've got reductio ad absurdum there. We're taking this to the argument to its most ridiculous extremes and arguing with that instead of the actual thing that is being advocated for. So it's a straw man, but it's a straw man using reductio ad absurdum. And yeah, in reality, I mean, really all we'd say is that are there certain topics which are very likely to be very sensitive for certain people, and if there are, there'd be things like rape or extreme acts of graphic violence or whatever. Sometimes it's just good to give people a bit of a heads up that that's what you're going to be discussing, just so they can mentally prepare themselves for that, or if they really feel they're not up to it, they can excuse themselves from it. It's not actually stopping you from discussing it, it's just certain people saying they may not wish to engage in those discussions, and they may like to be given a bit of a heads up beforehand. Trigger warnings are not anything like I said, nothing like as complicated as their opponents will imply. Their opponents act like it's this huge ask of them just to give a little bit of a content warning at the beginning of something. It's not really a big ask. If someone said to me, you know, I've worked as a teacher, I also write educational material as well, professionally. If someone said to me, you know, just try not to mention this in your material, or you know, try not to use foul language, or if you're going to mention such and such a subject, just be careful of it, or you've got such and such a student you're dealing with here, they've had certain experiences, just try not to say things like this around them, whatever. I've got no problem with that, because it's kind of my job. It's my job to teach people, you know, so I've not got a problem doing things like that. You know, it's not a big ask. If you think it's such a big ask of you to do that, you're probably just kind of a dick, really. You know, and I think probably, I mean, 100% of the people I've encountered who have this huge opposition to trigger warnings are complete dicks. The one argument I have heard that might be is fair is that sometimes people are using the word trigger warning a bit too liberally. Maybe trigger warnings specifically refer to usually triggering like things like PTSD or whatever, triggering actual trauma. Maybe the word content warning would be better to use more generally if we're just talking about an unpleasant subject that may not necessarily actually trigger trauma in someone, but we just think is a bit of an unpleasant subject and maybe we want to give people a heads up about it. We should probably maybe call that a content warning or something like that. That's a fair argument, you know, it's a fair argument, but it's not like a reactionary, conservative, ridiculous argument. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think. Goodbye.